The autumn rain pelted against the windshield as Margaret Maggie Thompson pulled into the parking lot of the Riverside Community Center in small-town Millbrook, Ohio. At 42, she had grown accustomed to the quiet rhythm of her life as a night shift nurse at the local hospital. The October evening was particularly cold, and she wrapped her worn cardigan tighter around her shoulders. As she hurried toward the dumpster behind the building, she had volunteered to take out the trash after the community meeting about the upcoming Harvest Festival. The fluorescent light above the dumpster flickered intermittently, casting eerie shadows across the wet pavement. As Maggie lifted the heavy bag to toss it in, she heard something that made her freeze a soft, muffled crying. "Hello," she called out, her voice echoing in the empty lot. The crying continued, weak but unmistakable. Following the sound, she peered over the edge of the dumpster and gasped. There, wrapped in a thin, dirty blanket, were two tiny babies. They couldn't have been more than a few days old, their small faces red from crying and cold. Without hesitation, Maggie climbed up and carefully lifted them out, cradling them against her chest. "Oh my God, she whispered, feeling their fragile bodies shivering against her warmth. "Who would do this to you?" The babies were clearly twins, a boy and a girl, both underweight and desperately in need of care. Maggie's nursing instincts kicked in immediately. She rushed to her car, cranked up the heat, and gently placed them on the passenger seat, using her cardigan as an additional blanket. Her hands trembled as she dialed 911. "This is Margaret Thompson. I've found two abandoned babies behind the community center on Maple Street. They need immediate medical attention." The dispatcher's voice crackled through the phone. "Ma'am, we're sending an ambulance and police officers to your location. Please stay where you are." Within minutes, the parking lot was filled with flashing lights. Paramedic Jake Morrison, whom Maggie knew from the hospital, approached her car. "Maggie, what happened here?" "I found them in the dumpster, Jake. They're so small, so cold. I think they're newborns." Her voice broke as she handed over the twins. Jake examined them quickly. "You did the right thing. They're dehydrated and hypothermic, but they're alive. We need to get them to the hospital immediately." Sheriff David Reynolds, a stern man in his 50s who had served Millbrook for over 2 decades, approached Maggie as the ambulance prepared to leave. "Mrs. Thompson, I need to ask you some questions about how you found them." "Of course, Sheriff. I was just taking out the trash when I heard crying. I couldn't just leave them there." Sheriff Reynolds studied her with his piercing gray eyes. "We'll need a full statement tomorrow. This is now a criminal investigation. Abandonment of a child is a serious felony." As the ambulance sped away with the twins, Maggie stood in the rain, watching the red lights disappear into the night. She couldn't shake the image of those two helpless babies, and something deep in her heart told her that this was just the beginning of a much larger story. 3 days later, Maggie sat in the sterile waiting room of Millbrook General Hospital, her coffee growing cold in her hands. The twins, now named Emma and Ethan by the medical staff, were stable but still required careful monitoring. As their finder, she had been given regular updates on their condition. Dr. Sarah Chen, the pediatrician overseeing their care, approached her with a gentle smile. "Maggie, they're doing remarkably well considering their circumstances. You saved their lives. Any word on finding their parents?" Dr. Chen's expression grew serious. "Sheriff Reynolds is investigating, but there are no leads yet. The babies are healthy now, but they'll need placement soon. Child Protective Services is already involved." That evening, Maggie returned to her modest 2-bedroom house on Elm Street. The silence felt overwhelming. She had lived alone since her divorce 3 years earlier, and while she had grown comfortable with solitude, something had changed. The image of those two tiny faces haunted her thoughts. Her phone rang, interrupting her reflections. It was her sister Linda, calling from Chicago. "Maggie, I heard about what happened on the news. Are you okay?" "I'm fine, Linda. But those babies." Maggie's voice trailed off. "You did a heroic thing. But you know you can't get too attached, right? They'll find a good family for them." After hanging up, Maggie found herself researching foster care and adoption procedures online. She had always wanted children, but her marriage to Robert had ended before they could start a family. At 42, she had assumed that chapter of her life was closed. The next morning, she made a decision that would change everything. She drove to the Department of Children and Family Services office in downtown Millbrook, a brick building that had seen better days. Caseworker Jennifer Walsh, a woman in her 30s with kind eyes and a tired expression, greeted her in a small office filled with stacks of files. "Mrs. Thompson, I understand you'd like to discuss the twins you found. I want to apply to be their foster parent," Maggie said firmly. "I'm a registered nurse, I have a stable income, and I have the time and resources to care for them." Jennifer leaned back in her chair. "It's not that simple. The process can take months, and we have to consider all factors. Have you ever been a foster parent before?" "No, but I've been caring for people my entire career. I know it won't be easy, but I feel connected to them. The state's priority is finding permanent homes for children. Are you prepared for the possibility of adoption if their biological parents aren't found?" Maggie didn't hesitate. "Yes, I want to give them the love and stability they deserve." Jennifer began pulling out forms. The process involves background checks, home inspections, interviews, and training courses. "It could take several months before you're approved. I'll do whatever it takes." As Maggie filled out the paperwork, she couldn't help but think about the challenges ahead. She was a single woman taking on the responsibility of twins, and she knew the community would have opinions about her decision. But every time she closed her eyes, she saw those two helpless babies, and she knew she couldn't walk away. That evening, she called her best friend, Carol Martinez, who taught at the local elementary school. "Carol, I need to tell you something. I've applied to foster the twins." There was a long pause. "Maggie, are you sure about this? To babies is a lot of work for anyone, let alone someone doing it alone." "I've never been more sure of anything in my life. I found them for a reason." "Well, you know Tom, and I will support you however we can. But be prepared, not everyone in town will understand your decision." Carol's words proved prophetic. By the end of the week, the news had spread through Millbrook's tight-knit community. Maggie found herself the subject of whispered conversations at the grocery store and sideways glances at church. Mrs. Henderson, an elderly neighbor, stopped her on the street. "Margaret, dear, don't you think those babies would be better off with a proper family?" "A married couple." Maggie held her ground. "I believe they'll be better off with someone who loves them, Mrs. Henderson." As she walked home, Maggie realized that her decision to foster the twins would test not only her capabilities as a caregiver, but also her resolve to stand up for what she believed was right, regardless of what others thought. 6 months had passed since Maggie brought Emma and Ethan home. The twins, now thriving and developing their distinct personalities, had transformed her quiet house into a home filled with laughter, crying, and the constant hum of activity. Emma was the more adventurous of the two, always reaching for new things, while Ethan was gentler, preferring to observe the world with his large, curious eyes. The financial strain was beginning to show. Despite her steady income as a nurse, the costs of raising two babies' formula, diapers, clothes, medical checkups, and childcare were overwhelming. Maggie had to cut back to part-time work to manage their care, which meant a significant reduction in her salary. One particularly difficult morning, she sat at her kitchen table, surrounded by unpaid bills and bank statements. The twins were napping, giving her a rare moment of quiet. To face the harsh reality of her situation, her phone rang. It was Jennifer Walsh from Child Services. "Maggie, I need to schedule a routine inspection for next week." "How are things going?" "They're wonderful, Jennifer. The twins are healthy and happy. They're reaching all their developmental milestones." "That's great to hear. However, I've received some concerns from community members about your situation." Maggie's heart sank. "What kind of concerns?" "Some people have questioned whether a single parent can adequately provide for twins, especially given your reduced work schedule. There's also been talk about your financial situation." "The twins are well cared for. They have everything they need." "I believe you, Maggie, but I have to investigate any formal complaints. We'll discuss this during the inspection." After hanging up, Maggie felt the weight of the community's judgment pressing down on her. She had been so focused on caring for Emma and Ethan that she hadn't realized how closely she was being watched. That evening, Carol stopped by with dinner and found Maggie looking exhausted. "You look like you haven't slept in days," Carol observed, setting down a casserole dish. "The twins had a rough night, and I'm worried about the inspection next week. Some people in town have been complaining about me, who Jennifer wouldn't say, but I can guess. Mrs. Henderson has been giving me dirty looks at church, and I overheard some women at the grocery store talking about how those poor babies deserve better." Carol sat down across from her. "Maggie, you're doing an amazing job. Anyone who spends 5 minutes with you and the twins can see how much you love them. But what if it's not enough? What if they take them away? Then we'll fight. Tom and I will testify on your behalf. Dr. Chen will vouch for you. You're not alone in this. The inspection went better than expected." Jennifer noted the clean, safe environment, the twins' obvious attachment to Maggie, and their healthy development. However, she also expressed concern about the financial pressures Maggie was facing. "I can see you're struggling to make ends meet," Jennifer said as they sat in the living room while the twins played on their blanket. "Have you considered applying for additional assistance programs?" "I've applied for everything I qualify for. The waiting lists are long. Maggie, I need to be honest with you. There's a family in Columbus who has expressed interest in adopting the twins. They're financially stable, married, and have experience with children." Maggie felt her world crumbling. "But they're happy here. They know me. I'm their mother. I know how much you love them. But we have to consider what's best for their long-term welfare. The state requires that we explore all options." After Jennifer left, Maggie held the twins close, tears streaming down her face. She had saved them from abandonment, cared for them through their early struggles, and now she might lose them to a system that valued financial stability over love. That night, she made a decision that would change everything. She would not give up without a fight. If the community and the state wanted to challenge her right to keep Emma and Ethan, she would show them exactly what kind of mother she was. The courtroom in downtown Millbrook was packed on. The morning of the custody hearing, Maggie sat at the plaintiff's table with her court-appointed attorney, David Kim, a young but determined public defender who had taken her case pro bono. Across from them, the state's attorney, Margaret Foster, represented the Department of Children and Family Services. Judge Patricia Morrison, a respected figure in the community known for her fairness, presided over the proceedings. The case had garnered significant local attention, with supporters on both sides filling the gallery. "This hearing will determine the custody arrangement for Emma and Ethan Thompson," Judge Morrison announced. "The state has petitioned to remove the children from Ms. Thompson's care and place them with an adoptive family in Columbus." The state's case was straightforward: Maggie's financial struggles, her single-parent status, and the community concerns about her ability to provide long-term stability for the twins. Attorney Foster presented documentation of unpaid bills, Maggie's reduced work schedule, and testimony from several community members who questioned her decision. Mrs. Henderson took the stand first. "Your Honor, I've known Margaret Thompson for years. She's a good person. But raising twins alone is too much for one person. These children deserve a stable, two-parent home." Sheriff Reynolds was called as a witness, and his testimony surprised everyone. "Your Honor, I've been investigating this case for 8 months. I want to be clear about something. I've never seen more dedicated care than what Ms. Thompson has provided these children." The defense attorney, Foster, pressed him. "Sheriff, aren't you concerned about the financial instability?" "Ma'am, I've seen plenty of wealthy families who couldn't care for their children properly. And I've seen single parents who would move mountains for their kids. Money isn't everything." When it was Maggie's turn to testify, she stood with quiet dignity. "Your Honor, I didn't plan to become a mother at 42, but when I found Emma and Ethan, I knew they needed someone who would love them unconditionally. Yes, I've struggled financially, but I've never let them go without. They're healthy, happy, and thriving." "Ms. Thompson," Judge Morrison asked, "what would you say to those who argue that a two-parent family would be better for these children?" Maggie looked directly at the judge. "I would say that love isn't about the number of parents in a home. It's about commitment, sacrifice, and putting children's needs first." I've been their mother since the day I found them, and I will continue to be their mother regardless of what happens in this courtroom. The most powerful testimony came from Dr. Chen, who had been treating the twins since their rescue. Your Honor, I've monitored these children's development closely. They've exceeded every milestone. They're securely attached to Ms. Thompson, and removing them from her care would be traumatic. Carol Martinez testified about Maggie's character and dedication. She's transformed her entire life for these children. She's learned to change diapers, stayed up countless nights when they were sick, and celebrated every small victory. She's not just their caregiver, she's their mother. The most unexpected testimony came from Tom Martinez, Carol's husband, who worked as a mechanic. Your Honor, I've been helping Maggie with some repairs around her house. I've seen her with those babies, and I've never seen a more natural mother. She talks to them, reads to them, and they light up when they see her. As the hearing concluded, both sides made their closing arguments. The state argued for stability and resources, while Maggie's attorney argued for love and existing bonds. Your Honor, David Kim said in his closing statement, this case isn't about money or conventional family structures. It's about a woman who saved 2 lives and has devoted herself to giving them the best possible future. The state should support families like this, not tear them apart. Judge Morrison called for a recess to consider her decision. The waiting was agonizing. Maggie sat in the hallway, holding the twins, surrounded by her supporters from the community who had come to show their support. When court reconvened, Judge Morrison's voice was firm but compassionate. This has been one of the most difficult decisions of my career. After reviewing all the evidence and testimony, I find that the best interests of Emma and Ethan Thompson are served by remaining in the care of Margaret Thompson. The courtroom erupted in applause. Maggie burst into tears, holding the twins close as her supporters rushed to congratulate her. But Judge Morrison wasn't finished. However, I am ordering the state to provide additional support services to Ms. Thompson, including financial assistance, child care resources, and ongoing monitoring to ensure the children's continued well-being. Sheriff Reynolds approached Maggie after the hearing. Ms. Thompson, I owe you an apology. I should have supported you from the beginning. You're exactly the kind of mother these children needed. 6 months later, Maggie stood in the same parking lot where she had found the twins, now 14 months old and walking. The community center had dedicated a small garden in honor of their rescue, and Maggie had brought Emma and Ethan to see it. As she watched them toddle around the flowers, babbling to each other in their twin language, she reflected on the journey that had brought them all together. She had faced judgment, financial hardship, and the threat of losing the children she loved. But she had also discovered the strength of community support and the power of fighting for what was right. The twins' case had changed Millbrook in small but significant ways. The town had implemented new support programs for single parents, and the Child Services Department had restructured their approach to prioritize existing bonds over conventional family structures. Emma tugged on Maggie's hand, pointing to a butterfly that had landed on a nearby flower. Mama, look, Maggie smiled, realizing that their story had come full circle. What began as a moment of crisis had evolved into a testament to the resilience of love and the importance of fighting for family, regardless of how unconventional it might appear to others. As they walked home together, Maggie knew that whatever challenges lay ahead, they would face them as a family that had been forged not by blood or legal documents, but by the unbreakable bonds of love, sacrifice, and unwavering commitment.